Welcome to All Ask the Questions Around Here, the podcast where we explore life's unexpected intersections. I'm your host, Dr. Joseph Elisha. Today, like always, we'll journey from the challenging conversations to the inspiring and lighthearted discussions that connect us all. Let's begin. Welcome to another episode of All Ask the Questions Around Here. Now, I wanted to start out by sharing a personal story. When I was growing up in Iran, and I lived there until the age of around 12 and a half, we had some favorite shows that we used to watch. And among those were the Rockford Files, Kojak, Bredesen. But one of my all-time favorites was Dr. Marcus Welby, MD. And he just epitomized everything that we admire, adore, respect, and love about our ideal of what a true family doctor should be like. Someone who is kind, compassionate, caring, there for you, and seemingly has all the time in the world. And that kind of leads me to introducing our next guest, Dr. Joseph Scherger. He is a recognized authority on health, wellness, nutrition, functional and integrative medicine. He holds an MD and a master's in public health. He's held multiple clinical faculty positions, including current one at Eisenhower and USC Keck School of Medicine. Authored hundreds of articles, and he has authored multiple books, has served on editorial boards, received multiple awards, and a founding dean of Florida State University College of Medicine. But before we start, Dr. Scherger, it seems we live in a world where prescriptions often come before prevention. And I see you as kind of one of those warriors out there who is not just about treating patients, but you're kind of transforming lives by redefining healthcare through the power of food and nutrition and reversing chronic diseases and unlocking our vitality through whole body wellness. And we're kind of going to dive into the science, the success stories, and the simple and yet powerful choices that we can make to change the trajectory of our health. And I suppose, this old adage of the doctor saying take 2 a.m, I think if one were to ask Dr. Scherger, he would say, go take some whole foods and vegetables, get rid of all the processed foods, and call me back in a month. For God's sakes, put down that mystery flavored protein bar, and let's get into prevention and how to get you whole again. And I am grateful for you being a guest on our show this morning, Dr. Scherger, and just wanted to start out by you telling our audience a little bit about yourself. And of course, there's a lot.
Well, thank you, Joseph. I appreciate all those wonderful things you said. Marcus Welby actually was an important benchmark in my own career. I started at UCLA Medical School in 1971, and I didn't meet Robert Young, who played Marcus Welby, but the doctor who wrote the series and was the real life Marcus Welby was the head of the residency program at Santa Monica Hospital. And,
I did not know that. That is a cool story.
It's a great story. And I gave a lot of talks. I've been working my whole career to give personal physicians, the family doctor, more time with patients, because the biggest problem is the very brief office visit. It's that productivity model where doctors only have 10 or 15 minutes with patients. They interrupt patients very quickly, are always, worried about time and trying to see way too many patients. And I have working to a number of ways to move beyond that. And I've done it with my own work here with my practice, concierge medicine in Indian Wells, where I spend either a half hour or an hour with all my patients. The secret of good primary care medicine is time. But then, the other part of it is the whole reason we exist is to help people be healthy. And it's not what pill to give, what procedure to do. Pills and procedures are an important part of medicine, but 80% of the reason that people aren't well, they feel sick, is due to lifestyle factors. And the biggest one of those is malnutrition or bad nutrition. So, getting people's diet right is the first step in helping them be healthy. And the other factors like regular physical activity and stress management and good sleep and factors like, having a good social life and having meaning and purpose. Those are, I've mentioned the 6 pillars of really good health. And, but nutrition is far and away the biggest one. And doctors regrettably are not trained in it, mainly because the pharmaceutical industry and the whole thing is based on pills and procedures. So I kind of left that box, if you will, and that's why I do my Restore Health practice.
And thank you for that introduction. And obviously, there's so much to talk about, but you hit on some really important concepts. And that is our relationship with food, which has changed so much. And it would appear that right around the 1980s, as you point out so beautifully in your book, we just kind of took off on this steep curve of processed food and carbohydrates. And almost in conjunction and parallel with that was the decline in our overall health, the rise in chronic diseases and inflammatory conditions and autoimmune conditions. And yes, for sure, I do believe that the pharmaceutical industry and the food industry, both of which have very powerful lobbies in our administration and Congress, have been a big push behind it. And just kind of takes me back to these old commercials about cereal boxes, which is all carbohydrates, and they show this thing about part of this complete nutritious breakfast, and there's hardly anything nutritious in what's being shown. But our relationship with food, I want to delve into that a little bit. And I often thought, if food was a person, an important person in our life, how would we interact with it? How would we relate to it? And we've talked about my relationship with food, and one of the things that I always say is I really, sometimes I don't feed my body, I feed my emotions. And, it's just this chasing dopamine kind of an idea. Can you elaborate a little bit on that, on how we as a culture and how you're finding people connecting and relating with food?
Wow, the great comments, Joseph. Food is medicine in the way we should work, but foods have been designed to be addictive. Many years ago, there was a book called The Dorito Effect, and it's the Lay's company who made the Lay's potato. I'll bet you can't eat one. Was the commercial, but they hired chemists with the sole purpose of getting people addicted to the taste of their Doritos. It was the first food that became incredibly habit forming. And that was by design because it's all about profit. I mean, it's all about, customizing a product and having it be very profitable. And I don't think they were malicious, wanting to hurt the health of the public. They kind of believed in their technology. I remember my own parents back in Ohio, they always believed in modernization. I remember when my mother, who was a great cook and a good, healthy person, but she never faulted the integrity of a food company. I remember when she got excited when Rice-A-Roni came out and believed in all the various commercials that were being on television, and I was a victim of that also. And
Sure.
but once you really understand it better and realize that it's not real food, It's only food-like substances, as Michael Pollan has eloquently described, that and then with the rise in obesity and type 2 diabetes and fatty liver and all these food-induced diseases. And indeed, we do become addicted. Very few people are addicted to broccoli, one of the healthiest foods you can eat. But people do get addicted to French fries and
I wish I was addicted to broccoli.
right. The real food with no labels is only there to nourish you, but it isn't there to hook you. A lot of the obesity doctors will say, I'm really not in the obesity business. I'm in the addiction medicine business.
Correct.
Sugar is the number one addiction there is. It's not, even more than alcohol and cigarettes and other addicting substances. It's all about the addiction of sugar. And it's got a dark history that made, they intentionally wanted us to be addicted because it made them more profitable.
And it reminds me of these very famous studies that came out, for the longest time. And I think you had admitted to that as well, where fat was labeled as bad. And so therefore, all these food companies jumped on the carbohydrate bandwagon and, loaded up our foods with not only just the processed stuff, but processed carbohydrates. And so that took a few decades actually to kind of get over that. But it also reminds me of a chapter that you have in your book concerning our gut flora. And this is a very hot topic right now. I read about it all the time, how our bacterial flora in our gut determines our overall health. And not to minimize our mental health, obviously, also contributing to our state of physical well-being. Can you elaborate a little bit on how our gut flora contributes to our general state of health, inflammation, autoimmune conditions, and such?
Well, it's enormous, Joseph. And it's still being worked out. I mean, the whole study of the microbiome has really taken off only about since 2015. And most of our immune system is in our gut. We most of our, the biggest nerve is that vagus nerve connecting our gut to our brain. So our mood on any given day in many ways depends on our microbiome. And the microbiome isn't just bacteria. It's also got lots of viruses and lots of even parasites and fungi. It's an inner garden of microorganisms that is 100 times more than the cells in our body, believe it or not. In numbers, if you actually took it, it would fill about a quart carton of milk, if you will. But the number of organisms is enormous. And it changes every day depending on what we eat, which is a main reason that I don't send in expensive lab tests of people's microbiome, because I can predict it based on their diet and turn it around very quickly. This nutritional healing works very fast. You'll remember when you've traveled to a foreign country and you start eating their food, you'll have kind of irritable bowels for a couple of days, mainly because you're reformulating your microbiome to the foods that you're eating in that new location. So it's a very, very dynamic inner garden that determines our health in a big way. And getting a healthy microbiome, you'll see it because your stools will tell you how things are going, and you learn
Right.
from that. But it's one of the most important ways of getting your nutrition right.
I took several courses in the history of medicine. And of course, in the 17 and 1800s, they used to glean a lot about our state of health by just looking and examining our urine visually and looking at the consistency of, the bowel movements and all of that. So, what happens when we take antibiotics? We're obviously wiping out this beautiful microbiome that you mentioned that we've created, right? So, What happens then? Do we need to be taking probiotics all the time?
Well, the answer is yes. I mean, I tell all of my patients, if you're ever put on an antibiotic, first of all, make sure you need it. Because I use the metaphor, it's like taking a flamethrower to your inner garden. You're like burning it down. I mean, it survives, but it actually takes about 2 months for your microbiome to recover from one course of antibiotics. And fortunately, we're starting to give much shorter courses of antibiotics. We now realize that a 3-day course of an antibiotic can treat a urinary tract infection, and a 5-day course can treat pneumonia when it used to be much longer courses. So we're lessening the damage to our microbiome, but still, you got to realize you're doing a lot of damage. Now, the probiotics is a way to reduce that, but it doesn't completely replace it. Because when we talk about 100 trillion organisms, a 50 billion probiotic taken every day is still a small part of that, but it helps. And then, but even more importantly, keeping your diet right while you're doing that. America had this horrible diet for people with diarrhea called the BRAT diet, BRAT, which was bananas and rice and apples, and it was all sugar. And but yet, if you want to reestablish your microbiome, eat the broccoli, and eat the eggs, eat the kind of foods that are going to help your microbiome. There are prebiotics and there are probiotics, and they're very important distinction. Probiotics that people know, that's when you're taking a mixture of healthy bacteria. But a prebiotic is the fertilizer that your microbiome needs to grow. So that comes from fiber and foods. So that's why your fiber in your diet is vitally important. It isn't just roughage. It isn't just something that goes through to give you formed stools. It's actually, feeding your microbiome with things that you can't digest, but they can, and they grow and prosper with those.
I've done thousands of anesthetics for GI procedures, upper endoscopies, lower endoscopies, and it's remarkable to me how, when we have people who come in symptomatic with abdominal pain and various forms of GI disturbances, when you do a colonoscopy, things look normal. And so therefore it speaks of how important the events that are happening at a microscopic level are impacting us. And because basically we're giving a normal report to the patient. Well, everything is fine. We took some biopsies and whatnot. But in a sense, what I'm hearing you saying is we should probably be treating our gut as a garden. It not only needs the seeds to grow, meaning the microbiome, but also the fertilizer to help it grow better.
You're exactly right. People say I have IBS, and the IBS is actually used for two very different problems. One is inflammatory bowel disease, like ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease, which are extreme forms of an unhealthy gut, which we now know are most usually reversible. But the other IBS is the irritable bowel syndrome, which is extremely common because it's caused by a poor diet. It's caused by some new words that doctors are just beginning to hear called dysbiosis. Dysbiosis is an unhealthy microbiome that's going to give you irritable bowel. And then there's another one called SIBO, SIBO, which is small intestinal bacteria overgrowth. What happens when you're eating certain inflammatory foods like gluten and other grains, the bacteria and all the other organisms that belong in your colon will start migrating up into your small intestine, and which is very permeable. So that small intestine, this stuff gets into the bloodstream and causes lots of problems, including some autoimmune diseases. So you've got to give yourself back on a diet that keeps the bacteria where it belongs in the colon. There's an interesting problem. The Barry Marshall won the Nobel Prize for proving that peptic ulcer disease was due to a bacteria, not just due to stress. And it was due to this bacteria, Helicobacter pylori, H.
Pylori.
pylori, that people test for. Do you have it? But that is a result of SIBO with this bacteria. And it turns out when you study the microbiome, all the things in the colon, H. pylori is actually a good guy. It's not a bad guy. It's only a bad guy if it migrates all the way to the stomach, and that comes from your diet. And you got to get it back down there. It's even true about C. diff, Clostridium difficile. People live in great fear of C. diff. When I was a medical student, grand rounds was listening to Alfred Hitchcock sit there and describe his C. diff colitis that he developed back in the early 70s, one of the most memorable moments of my medical school. A local doctor, Roy Young, and I were both there in that audience listening to Alfred Hitchcock describe what it was like to have C. diff colitis just as it was discovered. But anyway, that is, again, Clostridium difficile belongs in the colon. And it's usually overgrows because somebody was given antibiotics for too strong and too long.
Staying on this subject for a few moments, there is a lot of conversation now on the importance of vitamin D, various forms of vitamin B, and magnesium. And I think that they obviously work collaboratively together. But can you comment on how it is and why it is that right now there's so much focus on these three?
It's a great comment. I want to preface it by saying the problem is we're living a lot longer than we used to. I mean, evolution is what gave us all of these things. And evolution really didn't care how long we lived. They only wanted our species to survive. So it's designed to foster reproduction. So it's fascinating to me as someone who's becoming a geriatrician, watching things wear out. Vitamin D, which is known as the sunshine vitamin, because it's actually manufactured in the skin from sunshine working on your cholesterol in your skin. So to have healthy vitamin D, you need skin that's able to make it. And we know that after age 60, your skin doesn't make vitamin D very well anymore. So seniors are biologically designed to become vitamin D deficient, even if they're out there playing golf or pickleball every day, getting plenty of sun.
I had always wondered about that.
Yeah, it doesn't work.
I mean, we're bathed in the sun here.
Vitamin D is in every cell of the body. It's part of the immune resistance. It's part of the health of your cell walls. If you want to keep a young body, you got to have a healthy vitamin D level. Also, if your vitamin D level was low, you were way more likely to die of COVID than get through COVID without much problem. It's crucial for your immune system. So actually, it may be the most important supplement for anybody over age 50 to take, because you can't rely on sunshine anymore. But then also, when people are on such low-fat diet, that gets back to demonizing fat. It was, the one of the great writers who kind of uncovered this problem wrote a long article in the New York Times Magazine in 2002, said, what if it's all been a big fat lie? Which it was, because fat is not the enemy. Fat is one of the fat from natural foods like butter and cheese and eggs and things are some among the healthiest things you can eat. But it's, vitamin D is critical. Magnesium, we lose that when we become seniors. We lose our ability for B12 when we become seniors. So there's, evolution really didn't set us up to have healthy nutrition and these things as seniors, because there was no survival advantage for people to live a long life, let alone a healthy life. So in many ways, we're biohacking aging in our practices, which is actually good, because being 74 years old myself, I want to be young and healthy healthy as much as I can. So that's our modern life, and there's certain things we need to do to get there.
Should everyone be taking magnesium?
Yeah, it's a great question. You don't need magnesium when you're young, and probably not even when you're middle-aged. If you're eating a good balanced diet, there's a lot of magnesium in vegetables and meat, and it's all over the place. But again, it's one thing that you're just not absorbing and having very well when you get older. And so if your magnesium levels fall, then you've got lots of problems, muscle cramps, neuropathy. It's critically important for many parts of the body, but especially your neuromuscular junctions and your nervous system. You can relax and sleep at night if you use magnesium. Now, there's 8 different magnesiums out there. Some of them will give you diarrhea because it's a great laxative, like milk of magnesia, magnesium citrate. Some of them don't even get absorbed, like magnesium oxide. So, of the 8 different magnesium salts, because magnesium is a plus ion, it's got to be paired with a negative ion to be there as a whole molecule. So you pick a magnesium that hits the sweet spot to give you good sleep and relax your muscles and prevent leg cramps without causing diarrhea. So that's all been worked out now, and I take magnesium glycinate 400 milligrams every evening.
If we were to somehow find a caveman and look at their chemistry, their blood chemistry and their metabolic state, would you say that they would have been in perfect shape just because of their lifestyle and the way they lived? No processed food, obviously. And obviously, the caveat in that is that their lifespan was limited by the fact that they were being chased by predators all the time. And so they died in their 30s and 40s.
And they didn't have antibiotics to treat infections, and they couldn't heal their surface wounds very well. But no, you're right. Fascinating, Joseph. First of all, the DNA, they were still Homo sapiens with 23 chromosomes, pairs to 46 total. So the DNA would not have been that much different. But what has been studied, and there are remote populations in the Amazon and some in the Africa, the Hadza of Tanzania, who are still hunter-gatherers. So we have modern day cavemen, if you will. But what was really interesting is that their microbiomes are very rich. That inner garden is like a beautiful, elaborate inner garden that they have that is protecting them. And someone who lives on McDonald's, the fast food high school student who's living on, fast food, which is nutritionally depleted, and their microbiomes are really depleted, if you want to say. So they catch every cold that comes around. They can get serious illnesses. They're not healthy. They're those that living in a primitive environment and eating only real food will have a very rich microbiome. So that factor is really quite good. I like to bring up to my patients the movie Swiss Family Robinson, one of my favorites. And that family that got shipwrecked on that Polynesian island built themselves a home, and they had adversaries they had to deal with, but the only food they could eat was what was on the island. But fortunately, it had a rich array of vegetables and fruits and fish from the sea and wild boar running around, and they were incredibly healthy because they ate the real food that was on the island. And I tell people, only eat the food that you might find on that island, which is on the periphery of your grocery stores, that doesn't come from a factory and doesn't have a food label that you have to try to figure out.
And of course, it seems that although we are living at a time where we could virtually get anything and everything delivered to our doorsteps, and we could go to the supermarket, as you mentioned, and pick up any type of food. Probably the only way to live healthy is to eat farm to table.
That is a more guaranteed way of eating, no question about it.
I'm sure that everyone who is listening to this program, switching gears a little bit, knows of someone or has a connection with someone who is dealing with cognitive decline of some form, whether it's Alzheimer's, dementia, Lewy bodies, and we hear about it in celebrities, Bruce Willis. Now, you have some thoughts on that. And going back decades ago, we took it kind of for granted that as people hit their later decades of life, they become forgetful, and now any sign of forgetfulness is taken as a warning sign, and probably for good reason, because we're finding cognitive decline to be on the rise. Can you comment? I know you have some very interesting ideas on cognitive decline, Alzheimer's disease, and some ideas on reversing it, actually.
The good news, and a lot of people don't believe it, a lot of neurologists don't believe it. And I was trained that, once you lose cells in your brain, they're gone forever. And your brain can't regenerate like your liver can. And the truth of the matter is, while it's not easy, that's actually not true. And there's a very, very smart research neurologist who founded the Buck Institute up in Northern California that studies aging. And he has a series that's now into the thousands of people who have improved their cognition after being diagnosed with early dementia. So if you can catch someone in stage 1 or stage 2 dementia, you can actually improve it, not guaranteed with everybody, but you can do that by really purifying their diet and lifestyle. And I use that word by basically saying, make everything better. The reality is that we're getting right now an exponential increase in Alzheimer's disease and other dementias and Parkinson's disease, both neurodegeneration, all being induced by our modern toxic environment that we're living in and the toxic foods that we're living in. And that's a big, big problem, of course, and it threatens all the industry that's doing that to us. But we can do something about it. And his name is Dale Bredesen, and he has a brand new book, which is his masterpiece in my mind, called The Ageless Brain. It's a manual for you to keep your brain healthy at least to age 100, if not beyond. So everybody should read The Ageless Brain by Dr. Dale Bredesen. He really shook the world when he published a book called The End of Alzheimer's in 2017, and then followed that up with a couple other books. The neurologists and the academic people who make their living off of big grants from pharma, thinking we're going to have a magic bullet, don't believe him, and the results are not easy to get. And actually, there's a doctor in San Diego County who runs a memory care center and a clinic, Heather Sanderson, who's one of the proteges of Dale Bredesen. He wrote the foreword of her book, where they do memory testing every 3 months, and 75% of the people there actually show improvement. And I've seen that myself. It's not an easy thing to treat, because you got to get all the sugar out of the diet. You got to get all the processed food out of the diet. What I call purify the diet. You got to have regular physical activity. You got to be doing things like, dancing and making the music that they love. But once the diet is right and the physical activity is right and the sleep is right, you biologically can be on your way to stabilizing and even improving a problem. And I've seen it. We need to be doing more of this work. But there's not a magic bullet drug. Bredesen spent over 20 years trying to find one of those, realized that they're not going to do that. Amyloid plaques and tau proteins are markers of that, but they're scar tissue of an inflamed brain, a brain on fire, if you will. Sugar is the biggest culprit, and again, that's what is the biggest problem with our diet is there's just too much damn sugar.
You and I had a conversation about these functional MRI series where they looked at people who ate sugar versus people who are taking various addictive drugs, and essentially the same areas of the brain lit up.
No, it's Daniel Amen has done a lot of that work with the SPECT scanning, but functional MRIs, and some people are get confused because the brain tissue is actually made out of fatty substance. It's like butter up there, and it's not very big, but it metabolizes sugar to function. And our brain actually uses about 20 to 25% of all our energy every day, despite only weighing 2.5 pounds. So it's a very energy rich. You and I are using a lot of energy right now just talking this way. But if you throw an increased amount of sugar at it, if your blood sugar goes higher than 90, if you will, the brain begins to recoil. It doesn't like a high blood sugar. And there's been some elegant studies that show that with steady rise in blood sugar, even in pre-diabetes, the brain does shrink. And it starts on a path of cognitive decline. So I tell people that type 2 diabetes and even pre-diabetes increases your risk of dementia at any age as a senior. Sugar is the biggest one, but inflammatory foods, processed foods, too much mercury and lead in your blood from the toxic environment we live. You have to navigate a very healthy course to keep a healthy brain.
Now, of course, we could talk for hours about these neurodegenerative conditions. Some people refer to them as type 3 diabetes. Can you share a few words about your own opinion on these anti-obesity drugs, the Ozempic, all these GLP-1 agonists that are very commonly used right now at great cost, I might add?
They're clearly the most important drugs that have come out probably in the last 50 years, which is almost my entire career. I mean, they are game changers, and we're still learning about them. And, it's they were all developed from the Gila monster, studying saliva, and that kind of found that peptide that it does indeed lower blood sugar, but it has dramatic effects that we're, again, just beginning to learn about. And the biggest effect is it takes away your hunger drive, takes away that food addiction. You become much less interested in eating, and you and consequently begin to lose weight, which means you're burning your body fat at a much more rapid rate. But it has effects that even go beyond that. It's been shown that it works in the brain more than it works in your gut, although the side effects, if people have them, are usually in your gut and in your pancreas. The biggest impact is in your brain. And people not only curb their addiction to food and sugar, is that they're less interested in alcohol, they're less interested in cigarettes, they're less interested in any other addictive substances. The drugs don't need to cost what they do. A pen of Ozempic or Mounjaro costs less than $40 to make. So, we don't control drug prices in America. So we force Americans to pay for all the R&D and all the tremendous profits. But you can get these drugs, for much, much lower cost in other countries. So they don't have to be terribly expensive. A lot of Americans think that, oh my gosh, these drugs are so expensive because they need to be. That's really not true. That's what we allow to do in an unregulated pharma industry. It's going to be interesting to see what the current administration, who wants to take on that problem, is going to do. But as you said earlier, the lobby is very strong.
Switching gears a little bit about your own history, Doc, you have had obviously a very illustrious career, multiple faculty positions. You were the founding dean of a medical school. And until recently, you were actually seeing patients at Eisenhower Medical Center. Can you delve into some of the reasons why you decided to leave that establishment and start up your own very successful practice?
Well, thank you, Joseph. Actually, I'm very loyal to Eisenhower, and they pay 62.5% of my salary and give me benefits still because I'm a core faculty member in the residency program that I started a long time ago. So I spend half of my day in the family medicine residency. I'll be there this afternoon, and half of my day here. Now, I tried to convince the leadership of Eisenhower to start a concierge practice in the East County in La Quinta and Indio without having to have hospital privileges. Because I spent many years of my life admitting and work and managing people in the hospital. But for the 10 years before I came to Eisenhower as vice president of primary care, I had done administrative work as a dean of the medical school. You can't work in the hospital with privileges. So my privileges were out of date in their mind, even though I had done that for many, many years of my career. And so most Mayo Clinic and other clinics have concierge models that don't require you being the admitting doctor of the hospital. I see all my patients in the hospital. I've got my Eisenhower badge that I carry with me at all times. I'm linked into the system, but the CEO, who I've known since we both joined in 2009, he just said, Joe, the leaders of primary care don't want to do a concierge in East County, and do it on your own. So I was literally, encouraged to do it on my own, which is why I started this practice. I actually started in this office 3 years earlier in 2000 to spend one day a week doing lifestyle medicine consultations because they weren't part of what Eisenhower was doing in primary care. So my first 3 years, people could come to me one day a week on Tuesday for consultations. And then 3 years later, I started the primary care practice, which basically at age 74, I'll be 75 next month, I wanted to have a scaled down group of patients, which is what people do. And so I never thought of myself as concierge, but it just fits me because I want to keep working. I want to have my own ageless brain. Bredesen in his book convinced me that I should do this work as long as possible because that'll keep my brain healthy.
Of course. Now, a couple of personal observations about Dr. Scherger. And for those of you who are watching the video, I want to point out that he has, in fact, read every single book that's sitting on the shelves behind him.
I go through a book a week, not always in medicine and nutrition. I vary a little bit, but I read a lot. I listen a lot, and when I know it's important to my practice, I go ahead and buy it and go through it again. I will tell you that I've already read The Ageless Brain twice because it's so important. We've hit on the subjects. Dale Bredesen, and it's at my other office because that's where I write books. But if you ask me of all these, many, many books, which ones are the most important, I'll name two of them. One is the Dale Bredesen, The Ageless Brain, which I mentioned, and the other is a gastroenterologist in Washington, D.C. by the name of Robin Chutkan. She wrote 3 books before COVID, which are really good. I'll show you a picture. She's a Georgetown faculty member who runs the Digestive Center for Women. There's a picture of her with her name. This was called The Microbiome Solution, which was a wonderful book. But she said if you wanted to never get sick from COVID or other infections because you've made your microbiome literally impervious to falling victim to a lot of infections, you should read The Antiviral Gut. And this is, I think, a masterpiece. So I would say, read The Antiviral Gut and read The Ageless Brain. You'll be a long way in having a very healthy body and mind.
And those will be in the show notes, as well as a link to Dr. Scherger's website on my podcast. Now, another personal observation about medicine. Now, you and I could have easily a 5-hour discussion on the current real shortage in medicine, in doctors, and the ratio of doctors to our patient population here is simply not sustainable. There just aren't enough healthcare practitioners who are taking care of the doctors. And I made an observation this morning, actually a simple calculation, that, we tend to, or as a country, we are moving more and more towards a state where doctors have to be either employed or subsidized by hospital organizations or private equity backed organizations to support their practice. And that's through the variety of factors, right? Decreased reimbursement, Medicare cuts. And I know in anesthesia, every year we sustain cut after cut. But I made a very interesting observation that I think that if we as a society were to prioritize where we spend our money, in other words, if we're willing to drop $5 for a cup of coffee at Starbucks every single day, over the course of the year, that money could, with a little bit added to it, could easily support a doctor who is out there doing a concierge style practice where they can actually devote the time that you need to discuss your healthcare needs. And so part of the solution to the doctor shortage is actually within us.
You're right. It's an interesting thing to kind of explore, and I've spent a lot of my career talking about it. First of all, America spends 3 times more money in healthcare than any other country, and we rank about 35th in health of our population. So we don't need Starbucks more money is not the answer. What the answer is deliberate planning. We have abundance. There's a wonderful book I just finished called Abundance by Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson. I think it's one of the most important social political books I've listened to in a long time. And lots of people are talking about this book, Abundance by Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson. They're young, super smart people. But we don't have a money problem. We have a design problem. We actually have too many doctors in many specialties. We don't have a shortage of dermatologists. The medical students who are free to go into whatever they want to go into and figure out a way to get wealthy will go into what are called the road specialties. I would say you're a member of one of the road specialties.
Yes.
It's radiology,
Yes.
orthopedics, anesthesiology, and dermatology. So they're flocking there. And when I watch the waste, the amount of waste in American medicine is enormous. And doctors are doing things that don't need to be done. I get very upset with things like Mohs surgery being done on skin lesions that will never affect the health of the patient at all. And so we're overdoing it. We have an epidemic of care and an over-doctored situation. It's not wise. Now our shortage is in primary care, and that's because primary care physicians like me are not valued in our health system. We don't bring in the big bucks. We're just people's personal physicians taking care of 80 to 90% of their health problems, but it's not the big ticket items. And so it's a system that is way out of balance and out of alignment. And so fixing it is not raising the prices, if you will. It's raising our value and becoming strategic. As this book I mentioned, Abundance, we got to use our resources wisely. When we do that, we can create miracles. They use the example of the warp speed development of the mRNA vaccines during COVID, where something that took 10 years took 10 months. Now, not everybody is in favor of those vaccines, but they've actually saved many, many lives, and they've boosted people's immune systems. So when we get focused, like putting a man on the moon, for example, in the 1960s, which was amazing, when we get really focused and put all our efforts toward dealing with the problem, we can do remarkable things. And that really needs to happen with healthcare.
Dr. Scherger, you have a patient waiting for you. Thank you so much for the time. I know that you and I could easily talk for well over an hour on each of the topics that we discussed. And I have a feeling you're going to be a regular on my show, actually, if
It
you,
would be my pleasure. I'll
yeah,
make the time for you, Joseph. This
absolutely.
is part one.
I loved our conversation. I have great respect for you and your ideas. I wish that more doctors kind of followed your path. And part of my hope is that there are doctors listening to you who feel empowered and encouraged to kind of take the unpaved road, if you will, and do what is necessary, and success and financial health follows when you are doing the right thing. I'm a firm believer in that.
Thank you, Joseph. It's my pleasure and it's my honor to support you this way. And together we're going to do good things.
Absolutely. Thank you again for your time, and have a great rest of the day, Dr. Scherger.
You too. Thank you, Joseph.
Thank you. That brings us to the end of another episode of All Ask the Questions around here. I'm Dr. Elisha, and I hope today's conversation gave you something to reflect on and perhaps something to smile about. If you enjoy what you heard, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and join us next week for another journey through life's complexities and comforts.